Hey, welcome to the Future for Business Industry and Technology panel. There's lots of different areas that people have been coming from today, and we have a whole melting pot of people. I'm going to just quickly go through and introduce everyone, and if everyone's just gives themselves a little like two-minute summary of themselves. So I'll start with Bill.
Great. Well, thanks, Curtis. It's a great pleasure to be here. My job is I run a bank called Standard Chartered, and I'm on the board of a big pharmaceutical company called Novartis, one of the biggest in the world. And I know the reputations of the banking field and the pharmaceutical field. They're not very good, and there's some good reasons for that. But I think both those industries have changed a lot, and I think the pandemic has helped to change them further. And that the changes that we've undergone and are undertaking will be highly relevant for people that will be working in those industries in the future. And these are both huge employers of people and people with a very, very broad range of skills. The thing I think is changing is that these companies now, if we are not fundamentally purpose-led, if we can't demonstrate why we're adding value to society beyond what we can generate for shareholders or for employees, we simply won't be able to survive. It's very clear. It's a very clear commitment. The single biggest reason for that, interestingly, is not because that's what our owners demand or that's what our governments demand or that's even what our clients demand, but rather it's what our employees demand. It's what my colleagues demand. They won't come to work for us if they don't think that we're adding value in the societies in which we operate. So when I am talking to people that are thinking about a career in the bank that I run or in the pharmaceutical company that I help run, I look first for core skills, and those can be communication skills or marketing skills or quantitative skills or economic skills. It's critical to have a core skill set, but I'm also looking for somebody that wants to apply those skills in a very broad and purpose-led way, and that the people that are able to demonstrate that with real conviction are the ones that I want on the team that I work on. And I think for the bank I run is 100,000 people. And I would say that every one of them, to one degree or other, is purpose-led. And if they can't demonstrate that in their day-to-day, they're simply not going to be able to succeed in this business any longer. That may sound unfamiliar to you if you've only read about banks in the headlines of newspapers or whatever. But I think this is the new industry, and the pandemic has certainly underscored that. So, Curtis, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'll just stop now, but happy to talk about that in some more detail later.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get a small chance to do it as well. But yeah, that sounds amazing. So yeah, let's move on to Peter. Oh, you're muted.
I always forget that. So I always leave myself unmuted in meetings because I'm usually chairing them. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Great to hear from all of you, and very interested in what Bill said. So my background is, just very briefly, I was for 35 years, I think, mainly studying Fringe theatre, became a dramatist, a TV dramatist, read some magazine articles and books, but primarily in the world of fiction. And then a purpose took over me, as Bill talks about, and that was journalism. I'd seen basically journalism and my friends destroyed, the advertising sucked out by Google and Facebook, and a lot of scandals, starting with the phone hacking scandal and abuses of power. And so I just, to sum up, in the last 5 years, built 3 basic platforms. And it's like going back to Fringe theatre, which I loved in my early 20s. You were turned up, you built your own stage, you go and grab an audience off the streets in Edinburgh, and you tell them a story and you have a direct relationship. So I've done that with journalism, first with a crowdfunding site, byline.com, then with the Byline Festival, which is the world's kind of biggest festival for independent journalism. And in the last year and a half, a proper newspaper called the Byline Times.
Amazing. Okay, that sounds cool. So, and Neil.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you all, and thank you for being invited to speak. Very briefly, I've spent most of my career in banking. About 10 years ago, I bought my business from the bank I then worked for. And since then, I've been running what I might broadly call a real estate business, investing in retail, commercial, and housing schemes. And I think probably housing is the area which is of most interest to this audience. At least in Western Europe, I think it's accepted by government that they have a duty to provide housing for all their citizens. And therefore, housing lies right at the heart of government policy. And most governments are failing in one form or another. And we particularly see that in the UK, where we know we have a very substantial housing shortage. Probably 1 million homes are needed. And also we have an affordability problem where people starting out in their working lives simply can't get on the housing ladder. There are no easy answers in housing. If it were easy, people would have solved it years ago, because it is so fundamental. There's two kinds of choices that have to be made. One is how are homes provided? And we in the UK, just to make the UK a little case study here, have alternated between government provision of housing, so-called council housing or social housing, and the private sector providing houses. And that's the model we now have, where effectively the private sector build the houses, and for every 3 houses they build, 1 of them has to be for affordable homes. That's fine, provided the house is built. But if you don't build the 3 homes, you don't get the 1 social home. And that's the problem, that we simply haven't built enough homes. The second order of difficulty is where to put these homes, because the demand comes from places which are already very congested and very busy, mainly London and the southeast, where there's a lot of either actual national parks or green belt or areas of outstanding natural beauty, where it's actually extremely difficult to build homes. So you can either say, well, we'll build homes there nevertheless, or you can say, let's build the homes where we don't have those constraints, but that's not where people want to live. Both models have been tried in the UK. Both have big problems. The single biggest problem with the second model, which is simply saying we're going to nominate towns to have the expansion, is that these towns aren't usually very connected very well. We have a big infrastructure problem. We don't have enough rail lines. They're certainly not, I mean, the average town that's, let's say, 100 miles from London is over 2 hours away by train, which is ludicrous. And our roads are all full, and so on and so on. So we have a series of roadblocks to solving this problem, and there aren't any good answers. This government and the immediately 3 or 4 successive governments have simply been turning the screw on local authorities to make them face up to their responsibilities, but no big solution has been found. And I'm happy to hear of any if you've got any great ideas.
That's great. So we can talk more about that in a minute. So, and Sarah, if you want to just go a quick introduction.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. My background has been in the arts, but about 10 years ago, I moved over to academia, where I've been teaching at Oxford Brookes Business School and running some modules with postgraduate students, looking at the behavior of customers and event participants and how they interact with marketing. So I work with students both on postgraduate and undergraduate levels and in the marketing team and business development, where we analyze why customers and events participants behave the way they do. So festivals and large cultural programs, music venues, and how they respond to brands and campaign messages. So picking up a little bit on the Google messaging. So I work with students on how they can critically understand and implement strategic and responsible marketing practice. So it's quite ethically led. And the team I work with, works with psychology, sociology, and business and marketing. So no experience with young people, but certainly on the secondary and tertiary level schooling, I'm bringing my cultural background, my creative art background, and seeing if I can shift some thinking for future marketeers.
Amazing, great. So Richard.
Hi, thanks for the invite. Hi everyone. I'm a geoscientist. I've got a big passion for the Earth, global system, plate tectonics, climate change, all that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of one of the bad guys here. I work in the oil and gas industry. I always figured that I can try and make a change from the inside. I spend a lot of my time discussing with work colleagues, what is climate change? We all know climate changes all the time naturally, but we know that what we're doing to the environment at the moment is this anthropogenically induced climate change is real. You can see it, and it's really the rate of change which is the problem. You know, climate changes all the time. Earth systems can keep up through the evolution if it's slow, but when it's this fast, and we can see it's this fast, you know, we have big problems. So we've really got to slow down this rate as much as we can. What I've been doing recently is working for a company who use a lot of coal to power, and trying to get them a gas resource to power. Gas is seen as a transition fuel. It burns half the CO2 of coal. And so I've essentially worked myself out of a job because I've told them you can't explore for the gas in this South African company. You basically have to buy it in. Now you can buy it in, you can regas pretty cheap, and that's so they can get off their coal resources as quickly as they can to transition to gas. So that's, you know, a difference I think, you know, we're trying to make. But at the end of the day, so one of the big problems we have in the oil and gas industry is we often sort of poo-poo the BPs, the Shells, the Exxons. One of the problems is they're actually quite a small player in the world. You know, those three companies together are less than 10% of the production. Most of the production is owned by the state, and it's going to be very difficult to get Iraq, Iran, Libya, Angola, Nigeria, Venezuela off their oil resources, and that's one of the struggles. But change is happening in our industry. We saw only this month BP published their sustainability report. They want to go carbon neutral by 2050. Shell and Total are looking at reducing 20% of their carbon emissions by 2035. So for the IOCs, international oil companies, you know, they're changing, which is good. The issue is they're actually only a small player in the industry, which is bad. But, you know, we've got to start somewhere. What BP are doing and these companies are doing, they're looking at obviously reducing their oil production, increasing gas production because gas burns cleaner than oil. Looking at renewables, looking at biofuels, looking at hydrogen, both blue and green hydrogen, looking at CO2 sequestration, which is obviously linked to blue hydrogen, and then the way to offset burning oil is to have carbon sinks, like, you know, building an awful lot of forest. I mean, these companies, a company like Shell produces more CO2 through consumers burning combustible fuels than the entire UK put together. So to try and offset that is hard, but, you know, we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's a kind of crazy world. Great. So yeah, Melanie next.
Okay, well, I have to say, first of all, I can relate to an awful lot of what Sarah was saying. I am by background a marketer. I started my career with a certain cosmetics giant, and I left them because I was asked to launch a mass market children's perfume that I felt was particularly irrelevant, unnecessary, and unethical to launch. My employers disagreed. I therefore decided that it was a good time to leave France and come back to the UK. And that was kind of where I started my career. I have since spent it working in and around marketing, market research, using data, using an evidence base to try and develop products and services for people, and trying to find the rationale, the justification, and how to make things better. I'm a problem solver at heart. And that's a huge part of what I do as a marketer, I find. It's people have a problem, how do we actually fix that and develop things that will work, but without completely trashing any sense of ethics. And in more recent years, I've become disabled. And it would be fair to say that until you've actually experienced some levels of disadvantage, you are never going to understand quite what those obstacles are. So having encountered the very physical obstacles of the streets of London, for example, we used to live in Spitalfields, I've also encountered all kinds of problems structurally elsewhere, whether it's business travel. If you want to go, for example, on a business trip to Switzerland because you've got a client who needs you to go out there, it takes about 33% longer to be able to get there at the moment because of the accessibility issues. But overall, I've also been starting to get more and more concerned about bias in data, bias in the way data is being used, set up, artificial intelligence and machine learning in particular, and how this can potentially have a huge, huge impact on what is going on right now. And what we are not necessarily realizing and seeing is that you've got an awful lot of techies, and I would include myself among them. I'm currently doing a master's in artificial intelligence and data analytics at the University of Bradford. And there are some huge issues there because already we see some things reported like training data sets that aren't actually diverse across humans as a rule, all of the races. So you see people looking at white data sets and making that the standard for facial recognition. Huge problems with that. And so for me, I am passionate about what we do with data, how we make it fairer, how we remove the bias, how we establish a proper set of ethical frameworks to actually ensure that a lot of these things cannot be abused in the way that there is a huge risk there is. One of the things I would like to say is that if you don't have people of different perspectives, different colours, different levels of ability, as much human diversity as possible in a team, you will not solve those problems. We need people in there who can actually represent a different perspective. So we need more disabled people, we need more people from ethnic minorities in this country, we need more people in particular from Africa and India. India is actually pretty good on the AI, but we need to actually start working together across a whole range of experiences in order to be able to save the world. Because right now, we've got people out there who are developing products that will potentially replace actors. You can now, with deepfake technology, actually do AI-generated voiceovers and presentations and things like that. That's where I come in with some of the other speakers here. There are things we need to do. We need to decide what is okay, what is not okay, and how do we make sure that our world doesn't just wipe out jobs as a part of being efficient. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and my huge interest and where I intend to be taking things moving forward.
Great. And John, next.
Hello everyone, thanks for inviting me. I'm here for the kids. So my job, my background, so I was in the military for about 8 years and then left, actually tried to leave pretty much as soon as I joined, but it's quite hard to do that. So I started a career at Walt Disney as a creative producer, and I now have my own agency, and I've spent the last 20 years telling stories digitally and producing and making content, both entertainment based and educationally based for young children from upper preschool right through to 14, 15-year-olds. I'm really interested and sort of preoccupied with how we develop digital products that actually encourage resilience and hopefulness in the future. We are constantly, well, children are surrounded by a sort of 24-hour news circus that is constantly replaying, bad images, news events that just seem to go round and round in a circle. And that's not a fantastic diet to an environment to bring children up in. So I'm really here to educate, entertain through digital, and I think digital has a lot. There's a lot of bad going on with digital and social media, but there's also there's a lot of good that can be harnessed and used to make the generation Alpha, as they're called, resilient and ready to take on some of the challenges that our generation have handed them.
Okay, great. And then finally, Bridgette.
Yes, hello, I'm Bridgette McKenzie. I'm Director of Flow Associates and Climate Museum UK. My background is arts and culture, museums, and so I was Education Officer for the Tate and Head of Learning for the British Library. So I'm really all about how arts and culture can engage young people and, well, people in general, and how it can have purpose. So, but over the 30 years that I've been involved in the industry, I've been struggling with a lack of purpose, struggling with a sense that many of the organisations I work for are not strongly driven by purpose, but by the need to survive, the need to keep on having more bums on seats, to survive. And that's coincided with a time of increased austerity and the reduction in public funding of culture. And so over the past 10, 20 years, the cultural sector has created a USP as offering experiences, connection between people, live experiences, and people have increasingly traveled around the world, to visit museums. But all of a sudden this year, with COVID-19, the cultural sector is really struggling because that USP of in-person experience and contact has just fizzled out, and we're all, you know, trying to sort of make a living through the internet. And there is still a role for arts and culture, and I'm really strongly committed to culture having purpose. And for me, the future of arts and culture is in a much more ecocentric shift. So arts and culture for enabling an acceleration of learning, imagination, care for each other, and really overcoming the separation that we have from the living world. And so I've been involved in the founding of Culture Declares Emergency, which is thousands of individuals and organisations declaring a climate and ecological emergency, and my own organisation, Climate Museum UK. It's a distributed network of practitioners across the country, training and motivating people to talk about climate and ecology. And so we're not collecting for the future, we're collecting for now. So for example, I was holding up, you know, we use our collections, this Dump Trump mug, I was deliberately holding it up to use our collections to, you know, to get people talking and create a response to emergency right now. So culture matters now. And so when we talk about cultural recovery, we're really hoping, I think, for the future generations to remind us of what matters. I'll stop now.
No, that was great. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, we've got a really, really diverse panel full of. Do you want to say something? Yeah, you go ahead, Bridget.
Paulina hasn't spoken.
Oh, sorry, Paulina's actually just here to help, so she's not actually on the panel.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. But you can say hi, Paulina.
Hi. I might have some questions later.
Yeah, great. So yeah, we've got a hugely diverse panel. I'm actually going to just take it a little bit more abstract here and just basically talk a little quick moment about the Great Imagining, because basically the purpose of this is to kind of, for everyone to kind of throw all these ideas into a kind of big discussion about where we can kind of push the future of you know, our kind of societies and businesses and industries into a place where we can all kind of agree that this is where we want to be, and so there's a kind of purpose here where it's like there is something that we can kind of instill in the landscape of people's ideas, and it would almost be good if there was something like almost like a kind of specific action that you feel like the industry is not I mean, I'm kind of putting the question to all of you, but basically the industry you're in right now, is there something that you would feel would be beneficial for the next generation to learn about it / develop for that when they go into that industry? What would be good for them to you know, have a new perspective and have a new kind of way of approaching it?
Can I have a shot at answering that for you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to pick up on something that John said, because he said straight away that he's a teller of stories. And quite a number of the people on this panel are in one form or another tellers of stories. They may not have put it exactly that way, but that's kind of what they're about here. And then there's another group of us, of which I'm one, who are people in industry. And just talking about my own business, the business of constructing houses, we have a terrible problem in that when we go along to a community and say, we'd like to build several hundred houses in your community, they always say no. They always object to it without fail. And I think part of the reason for that is that although we consult with them and we go along and say, look, this is what we're planning to do, we don't do it in a way which tells a story that's comprehensible to them. We do it with blueprints and maps and models, and these are not things which are familiar to most people in their everyday lives. I'm convinced if we went along with poets and artists and people who were inherently empathetic, we would get a much better response from communities, because we'd be clearly listening to what their concerns and objections were, in a way which I think putting up a display of models and posters just doesn't look like we're doing that. And I suspect that's true of the oil and gas industry and maybe pharmaceuticals. And having been a banker, I'm bloody sure it's true of banking. So that's an idea that might be useful. I mean, I know it sounds a bit wacky, but it could be useful.
Sounds perfect. Yeah, Melanie, you have something to add?
Well, I've got a wackier suggestion still, actually, in response to Neil's, what he's just said there. Because actually, for me, coming from my background, I would argue that you're starting in the wrong place. You are going there with a solution that you have already designed, that you are taking to these people and saying, this is what we want to do. What you haven't perhaps done in this particular instance, and which we would start differently in other places, is to go to the community and talk to them and say, we understand that there are issues, we understand that there needs to be more housing, we understand that with that there comes to be a need for things like, for example, education, infrastructure and things like that. Can you talk to us about what your dreams are and hopes are for your community? Where is it that you want to go? What do you want to see happening? And actually, when you're putting together your development plans, actually taking that feedback, engaging people in it, and actually helping them construct their community rather than imposing an addition that may or may not be almost a kind of separate part or suburb to what they already have. How do you get them? How might we actually involve communities in the expansion of that with all of the new housing? Can we approach it that way maybe, instead of going there with plans and charts saying, this is what we want to do? Because that doesn't give them any agency at all. It gives them a choice to say, yes, do it, or no, I won't have any part of it. It doesn't give them any chance to truly adopt it.
Great. Yeah, I think John wanted to say something quickly about stories, and then yeah, Peter and Sarah, I'll give you a moment after that. Okay. Yeah. So Sarah, if you wanted to start, and then maybe Peter afterwards.
Well, I just was going to pick up a little bit on Neil's point about storytelling and his kind of idea, and a little bit about Melanie saying. I think one of the things I find when I'm not being an academic, I work as a consultant, and one of the things I do is work with community groups on looking at what art is and culture is actually embedded into their community, and celebrate that. What happens, I live in a part of Oxfordshire where we're constantly getting lots of housing. We seem to be the housing village of Oxfordshire that's growing at an exponential rate. And what happens is we lose all of that cultural identity. We've got a quarry that's full of houses. We've got a little railway line that's been shut down. So my provocation, and I totally agree with Neil, is that when a lot of the houses that we need come into communities, we lose that sort of infrastructure, but the infrastructure of the storytelling that brought those original buildings together in this community. And we have heritage sites and we have heritage organizations, but there isn't a sort of celebration of that kind of storytelling DNA. We lose it. And I'd love to see housing associations say, well, look, let's we do allow cultural and arts to come in, but in a new way. Let's kind of invest in what the community wants, aka what Melanie's saying, but encouraging communities to reinvent their story, reactivate their story, re-celebrate their story. That's there, it's there, and we tend to kind of build over it, I think, from my experience.
Great. Actually, sorry, Peter, I will let you speak. Just Bill, I know that you actually have to go very soon. Is there anything you wanted to just quickly add about maybe the in this context?
Okay, I think Melanie's idea of going to the source of the communities that are going to be affected by any of the businesses that we do, including educational undertakings or introduction of arts and culture, the more you can involve the community, the better off your product is going to be at the end of the day. But sometimes I think it's also important that you have some ideas to bring to the community that may not be on their immediate radar screen. So it's got to be an iterative process where we have a back and forth. But certainly in my experience, and when I say community, I'm using it in the broadest possible term. I consider the people I work with every day to be one community. and the clients of my companies are another community, and then the people that we serve who don't happen to be clients of ours but are affected by what we do are a broader community. And then the more that we can be informed, and I think this gets down to some pretty hardcore, data and analytical techniques. This isn't soft stuff. Right? This can be very, very hard stuff, or it can be soft stuff. It's just and I love the storytelling idea. And I just thought Neil's idea of engaging with communities through stories and tapping into especially what we have in London in this incredibly rich cultural environment is just an excellent way to begin that process of iterative engagement. I didn't mention that I'm also the chairman of a theater company in London, which happens to be run by my wife, and so I probably spend half of my working life, as it were, in the arts and culture as well, and that's all about community, right? That's the raison d'etre for cultural institutions, is to bring communities together and move them forward. And if it's not iterative, I think we're missing something really important. So I think this has been a super rich conversation.
Great, yeah, thanks. And Peter, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, having, as I said, spent 25 years in theatre and in culture as a storyteller, just one word of caution. Storytelling is a contested space, it's power. Who gets to tell the story? And as a journalist, what I realize is that, whether it's QAnon or what happens in America or certain stories, there are a lot of people who focus on telling stories to our detriment. And the two solutions to that, I think, is exactly what everybody's saying, is hear the stories from the ground, because they're usually imposed from above to get a certain end result. And really, looking, at the work Richard does, or what Extinction Rebellion says is there, whether you agree with them or not, what's their first premise? Tell the truth. And I think this focus on PR, stories, myths, that leads into that weird cultish space we're now seeing with the pandemic, with QAnon. It's a good story, this, huge conspiracy. It has no basis in fact. And so looking for how you validate a story, there's two truths. One is, did it happen? I get this legally all the time. Is this a glass of green tea or is it polonium? These are important questions if you're in a restaurant in London 15 years ago. But then what everybody else is saying, the different stories people have and how they negotiate them. I started my career in India with the Naya theatre group, where there'd be villagers and tribal people with their stories, and they would clash. And somehow you can't use culture to sort of as a balm. It actually is a forum to play out these conflicts and hopefully reach consensus. But this danger is we create a consensus that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, John, you wanted to say something?
Thanks, Peter. I think you bring up I just wanted to move the debate on slightly, actually. We're talking about the future for the younger generation and how we build out a curriculum. So what Peter's brought up there is something really interesting, which is around critical thinking. And I'd like to maybe ask everybody, actually, what is a curriculum that's fit for purpose that actually helps our young people navigate quite a treacherous, road in terms of, where they get their news, what sort of news they listen to, and how do we build young people resilient and robust enough to be able to cut through what is truth, what is an untruth, and because that in itself is a huge blocker to how we kind of progress forward. I have a 14-year-old daughter who already I find is polarized the echo chamber of the media that she sits inside of. We as a community, as a society, have started to lose that grey area in between the two arguments where someone can take a stand and actually have a reasoned debate. At 14 years of age, my daughter was already firmly entrenched in one position, which is terrifying for a parent. Most of our dinners in the evening is me and my wife spending our time trying to unpick and trying to resolve and re-represent some additional facts to her that she might want to consider. So I'd be interested to hear what everyone else has to say about that.
Yeah, Richard, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I guess it's always, you've got to teach kids to go to the source, where do you find the data, and then look at the actual data. Because as a scientist, I always like to go to the, where facts and figures and data is all, you can teach these kids to work this stuff out themselves. Just to go on a quick anecdote there. I've eaten meat quite a bit, and it was only last year I worked out myself how much methane comes out from a cow, and one beef cow is equivalent to 30,000 miles in a car. It's quite easy maths to work it out. It's like, wow, 30,000 miles in a car. Yeah, 30,000 miles. Yeah. And I don't eat as much meat anymore because, and I've read, meat's bad and a beef burger's 200 miles. But it's not until you really think about it and work it out yourself, you think, oh, okay, that should, So yeah, just teach them where to find data.
Bridgette, did you want to pitch in here, or?
Yes, I'm still on that original question really about what our industry needs to do. And I just wanted to say that arts and culture is not just an industry. It is actually an approach to life. It's a habit or practice. It's arts and culture is what humanizes us and connects us to others and to the living world. So my industry needs to stop thinking like an industry in a way. And that leads to the question of, actually, do we need to decouple the idea of work or future careers from the need to earn money, which then leads to the question, do we need a universal basic income? So, we have to actually look at fundamental systemic changes that are needed to enable the thrivability of young people in our communities. And all of us as industries or practices need to work together towards these big questions about thrivability. And this comes back to the notion of telling the truth. Telling the truth is maybe there are some big, simple, clear truths, but there are vast possibilities for what we might imagine and create together, and for understanding what's gone wrong in the past and how we might seek reparations. And that requires conversation, storytelling, conversation, whatever. We all need to get together much more and talk in relation to the problems we face in our places and in our big place, the planet. So, for me, that's the purpose of culture, but also the purpose of interdisciplinary working, which is what this project is doing, and it's very exciting.
Can I just quickly, the question of truth and finding the facts, and I think this is what John said about his daughter. We are under attack, and let's not. This is an attack on the facts and on the intellectual quality, on scientists. The COVID shows very easily how scientists' voices are silenced, and people are listening to journalists or whatever journalists, producers of alternative truth. And the alternative truth is found on YouTube. And any opinion that is done by academics is dismissed, so I think we are facing a very big fundamental kind of problem, how we teach the kids. And I mentioned this on the chat. In Finland, there's a huge program on digital literacy, because also what Melanie said about AI and bias in AI, and how the algorithms are kind of formulating and creating reality which is online. The question to Melanie, I would like to ask, what legislation we need, because at the moment it seems that our laws and legislations are behind anything what is happening right now, and how we can tackle the kind of how we regain the trust in institutions, that now this trust is kind of eroding purposely. So people are not trusting academics, people not trusting, because this is something which is abstract. So actually to everyone, kind of, generally.
Would anyone have a response to that? Or yeah, Melanie?
I think, first of all, it is one of the hardest areas to legislate at the moment, not least because as a field, it is growing and the progress is extraordinary. And one of the problems with law is it's very good at establishing what is and regulating what is. What it's not very good at is anticipating the future case and where that might be taking you. So for example, what we have seen recently is something called GPT-3 that got developed by OpenAI. And you may have seen some articles recently in places like The Guardian that were indeed written by GPT-3. Now that's actually been bought, licensed by Microsoft, which is, yes and no, a good thing. It's good because it means that it doesn't get into the hands of, say, Vladimir Putin, who could then be using it to fire up his little bots and starting to try and genuinely do even worse damage in terms of social media posting that might be biasing political outcomes and things like that. But the fact that that technology exists, that we've got natural language processing to the point that it can convincingly write and be mistaken for a human, that is not something that you can necessarily anticipate with a legal framework. And while I think we are a very long way from, for example, people often confuse the concepts of artificial intelligence and an artificial general intelligence. And I think it's really important to see the difference between the two. An artificial general intelligence would almost be human-like in its ability to function. We are a very, very long way from that. But at the moment, the problem that we have is not enough focus on what the unintended consequences of what we are doing could be. And also there is a lack of breaks. There's a whole kind of, for me, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. It's really, really important. And if you take it absolutely extrapolating out to the logical conclusion, you end up into the 24th century with the Star Trek universe and the Borg and all that kind of thing. And I think actually one thing I'd love to see on the curriculum is Star Trek The Next Generation actually put on there as a subject, because it treats so much of the ethical consequences of artificial intelligence, of where we go with technology. It's already handled the idea of universal basic income, the fact that because we can actually replicate food, there's no longer scarcity in food or other things, and people are then encouraged to follow their desires, their will. They can be artistic if they want and know that they've got food at the end of the day. And to me, it's all about saying we have got phenomenal technological power. We have to try and imagine, and legislators don't imagine. So it's going to, I think, be down to the technologists to create frameworks that potentially I say, because it's not a given, that actually help regulate the worst excesses. And that's why I would be encouraging any of the kids out there who are watching this, get into this. We need you, we need your views, we need your creativity and imagination, and we need you to put checks on what is actually happening at the moment and help us make it work.
Yeah, Bridgette, do you have a response?
Just a very quick challenge to the notion that there isn't or won't be food scarcity in the future. The biosphere is collapsing. We can't assume that food will be available. And so I think the future is actually going to be variant depending on where you live. And increasingly in more places, there will be food scarcity, and technology and data might be useful, but primarily it's going to be a job of hands and interconnection with nature.
It is, but in the Star Trek model, and the reason why I mention it, is that they have actually used technology for good to try and actually find ways to mean that food scarcity doesn't happen. And I think that's actually something we should be focusing on much more with the technology we're using to try and bring food scarcity to an end across populations. There's massive food inequality and we have to tackle it. And tech should absolutely be focused on this.
I agree.
Peter?
Just on this, how to fight, the algorithms, the racist algorithms, the non-general AI. I've worked a lot with Cambridge, with Cal Cadwallader on Cambridge Analytica. Byline Times has published 2 new articles on it, and the tech giants. And they are so vast that you cannot tackle them on an individual government scale. They're vast monopolies, and even the EU has difficulties. But there is one solution to that, and this is something a great imagining that all kids should know. If data is the new oil, where they're extracting it from. They're extracting it from you, and they're not paying you. And one of the things Germany is so good at, having gone through the Gestapo and the Stasi, is understanding that privacy, your data is both a human right, a precious sort of part of yourself, and shouldn't be given away free. So I think there is a consumer role here. There is, and children say, you don't get Facebook. I know you're a free service, but you're not. I'm the product. If the product is free, you are actually the product. And that we can as individuals or collectively move together to regain our data and our rights, because that's the fuel that's driving them.
Yeah, Sarah, you're muted.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting, this whole idea of where you find out things. Talking about John's 14-year-old daughter, the first 3 weeks of the undergraduate program is how to find out where your articles come from. How to fact check yourself, a student, they're given their assignment and they go to Google Scholar, they'll go to Wikipedia. And so at the age of 18, they're being asked to change hats and become an investigator of fact. So my question, after sort of watching these blank faces, I run a seminar called the Wild West, and that is where students are going to for their information, completely unfact checked, completely unregulated, and then funneling them to library sources, comparative analysis. Isn't that too late? So you're telling someone who's been spoon-fed education to reach a degree of a qualification, an A-level, wherever we are in the world, and then you shift gears and say, okay, well now you need to investigate where your facts have come from. And I think that's just too late. It's too late at 18 to be sitting down in the classroom, already a rarefied position. They're all paying to be there. So right there, you've got students who are, segmented from a large portion of society and saying, okay, well now you're the ones that get to fact check. So fact checking should start at right when we're learning how to eat, where sugar is coming from in our food, obesity problems, fats, McDonald's on YouTube channels for kids. All of that starts at a very much more formative age, and fact checking needs to as well.
Yeah, perfect. Has anyone? Yeah, John? You're muted again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big conversation. It's a trite point I'm making, but I often feel as a parent that the consumption of news should be treated in the same way as I tell my children about strange men in cars with sweets and puppies. It's that bad. It's really that bad. It's actually, we almost got on we're almost in a post-trust world now, where actually, nothing that you read or can be really trusted, which is terrible. So, I mean, I like the idea of a human API to sort of lean into something that Melanie was talking about earlier, but this idea that there's a human API that actually you can turn on and off what access companies and data actually have on your information. So you are actually in control. You're not you can't turn the tide on the idea of being the product. Yeah.
That's great input. And is anyone else any last things? I think we might be wanting to. Oh yeah, Melanie.
I was just going to say that I absolutely agree that we have to start with the children while they're still at school. But one of the things that I would observe is that that's almost too late, because one of the problems we have is their parents. And there's an awful lot of parents out there, the ones who are going to these demonstrations, who are still standing there with their banners about QAnon, blaming Bill Gates for microchips in vaccines, really? But these parents are transmitting their own lack of critical thinking, their own ignorance, their own inability to evaluate the sources to their children. And so those children are out there thinking, well, mum and dad have been my sole source of information and guidance all my life. Maybe I think that they're wrong, but I still owe them respect as my parents. So to me, the bigger question is, how do we get the parents back to a point where they understand? Seriously, that's a huge problem. I don't have an answer, but I'd really like one, because we are in dire need of that, if you ask me.
Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and it's one of the things I see. The sort of liberal elite like to sort of poo-poo the Sunday readers. Oh, they don't know what they're doing, and instead of engaging with them, people who have an understanding about something, it's easy to just, oh, I'm just going to de-Facebook you. I'm just not going to talk to you about that issue. But actually, you've got to engage with them and explain to them, well, why do you think that? I'm up in Yorkshire, and there's you know, I know some racist people, and you just have to say, well, what are you basing that on? You know, I think someone was having a go, oh, all these Muslim mosques are building, and then actually you explain, well, actually there's more Christian churches in Iran than Muslim mosques in the UK. So, you know, just to get them that actually they're not taking over the world, you got to talk to people instead of just ignoring them, you know, and slowly the actual facts and the knowledge, you know, it you know. And I guess obviously the media have a big part to play in that as well, because what you're trying to do is explain to them what you had in the paper isn't really true. It's more like this. But we do sort of like to ignore people who don't have the same opinion as us. It's easier that way rather than trying to engage them. Oh, why do you think that?
Yeah, great. I think we there's been lots of really interesting ideas being thrown around, and I think there's going to be lots of questions from anyone who's listening. I think if we do want to, maybe Pauline, if there is any questions, maybe we can put forward, and then maybe we can discuss along the lines of what's coming from people listening.
There were questions, but I got disconnected, so I lost them. At the moment, there is a lot of comments, but I don't see the question. I have a question. Just maybe someone will post a question. But climate change. I personally have a problem with the term climate change because it's extremely abstract. It's something, and from what I know, people don't think in abstract. Generally, they don't like abstract things. It's very far away. We're going back to kind of storytelling. What storytelling we need to kind of start to produce so more people will think that climate change affects them. So like pollution, it's a very good thing because you open the doors, you open the window, you see pollution, you smell the thing. And I think a lot of climate change denials are operating on this fact that people have difficulties with grasping big, you know, in 50 years time, we won't have food. I mean, most people are like 50 years time, I don't care. Like I smoke cigarettes, I might in 20 years die of cigarettes is so far away. So is there a way of creating narratives which convince people that actually climate change is real?
Yeah.
Using different narratives.
John, I think you had your hand up, or maybe Bridgette.
Well, let Bridgette speak. You know, I'm doing I'll let Bridgette speak. I can come in later.
Great.
I just want to, because we deal in Climate Museum UK a lot with how to communicate and concepts and the use of our terms. We don't use the term climate change. We don't even focus on climate. We talk about the climate and ecological emergency, or the Earth crisis for short. And we always try to explain how climate intersects with other dimensions of our life. And we also know that people feel climate change or the Earth crisis in their bodies and their lives. And so we try to make connections in an embodied way to do with how people feel the temperature, how they are experiencing changes in the weather, what they're eating, and what might change in future. So it isn't just about terminologies, it's about expanding the conception so that you're making connections with embodied experience, but at the same time expanding horizons to understand how others are living and how it was in the past and how it might be in the future.
Yeah, John, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that's great, Bridgette. I think one of the things that, you know, because I build digital products for kids, and I think teaching kids around actions and then outcomes, but kind of flipping it around the other way. So you talk about climate change, you talk about food crisis or food emergency, and you kind of you sort of drop that as a kind of thought bomb on an 8-year-old. That's quite a lot to take in. But if you're able to give them actions that they can take, micro actions that they can take, and then once they've taken that action, you can then overlay what the outcome of that action was. That's a much more gentler, softer way of doing it. So we're doing a project at the moment for Cartoon Network, you know, big broadcast company right across Europe, and we're doing something called the Climate Champions, and we are we've produced 256 micro actions that kids can take, everything from recycling and reusing to planting to using less toilet roll, turning off lights, all of those kind of things. They're all little micro challenges that those kids can take. Once they take the challenge, then they're told what the impact of that is, but it's also plotted on a map so that the whole of all the children across Europe who like Cartoon Network can actually see the kind of collective action that everybody's taking towards that that goal.
Yeah, amazing. So is there any other points on that, or should we take another question? Yeah, Richard?
Just the point that it's amazing how difficult it is to find or to search the real data behind why we believe climate change, anthropogenic induced climate change is happening. And what I'd love to see as part of this program is just to show them the data and take them through it. You know, we know CO2 varies, we measure it in the ice cores. We have 700,000 years of annual data of CO2 change. And you look in the last 100 years and it's just overnight, it's just gone up. It's just shot up CO2. So we know it's actual measurement, it's not made up. So we know CO2 has gone up. And then you have to link that to temperature, and then you can explain that we can only record temperature for the last 50 or 100 years. Before that, we used proxies of oxygen isotopes and things. And you see the relationship between CO2 going up and temperature going up. And the temperature's gone up, skyrocketed as CO2 skyrocketed. And if you show them the data, the clever kids go, oh yeah, I get this. Yeah, now I get it. Humans have done that. And just that's what, you know, and then the impact of that, I mean, that's very difficult because of the various negative and positive feedback cycles and stuff. But then you have to show them these real world examples. You got Kilimanjaro, used to be full of ice, now with almost the ice is gone. You know, you see retreating glaciers all over the Alps, you know, all that kind of stuff. But just to me, just you look at the data and go, wow, okay, yeah, that's obvious. But then there's still these naysayers out there. I would just show them the data.
Yeah, important point. So is there any other questions, Paulina, that people have had since then? You're muted.
Just comments. So, I mean, does everyone reads the comments on the chat, or is there a point of?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we're reading the comments. So, does anyone have any other points that they want to make? I mean, we've got about 15 minutes left, so yeah, we can still kind of get in something a little meaty if anyone's got any ideas. Yeah, Richard.
I think it's one of the questions about oil companies, why oil companies reducing their CO2 emissions. And I think that's, you know, interesting. And so what I've seen in my career is, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, some oil companies tried to go green. You know, BP had a little green sunflower and it wasn't, you know, a little bit wishy-washy. Literally this year, every European oil company has come up with a sustainability plan, because shareholders are asking, well, if I want to invest in you, show me a sustainability plan. And that is, you know, I can only link that to Extinction Rebellion and the media, and also maybe what Trump's doing, and you're thinking, wow, okay, I don't want to be like that. So, you know, I mean, literally this year we've seen big changes in oil companies driven by shareholders, because no one wants to invest in these companies unless they have sustainability plans, and that means reducing CO2 emissions. So it's power to the people. It's slowly making a change. The only, you know, negative there is these oil companies actually aren't a big part of their industry. You know, production comes from the state, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, slow change in a fast moving space.
Yeah.
So we had a question from Sari. What are your greatest fears with regard to the past and present future of digital technology? Yeah, so maybe someone could respond to that. I think we've covered some of it, but yeah, Melanie, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, that's a question. I'd like to hear from Melanie, because I think,
Melanie,
you know,
yeah, John.
I think AI and machine learning and all of that really does present us with both a brilliant looking future and also one that you know is terrifying.
Yeah, so yeah, Melanie.
I think my greatest fear is that machine learning remains to preserve, with respect to anyone who fits the profile here, of a small group of white, straight, able-bodied males with a certain background and upbringing, because that will not help us, because their assumptions as they create will almost certainly exclude far too many people by accident, if not by actual conscious design. And I think One of the things that we learn, first of all, when we enter machine learning, or should do these days, is the whole Spider-Man principle. With great power comes great responsibility. I think there is hope in the fact that the very course that I am on, before we get anywhere near any coding, programming, anything of that description, putting together models, deciding on solutions, the first course we take is ethics, law, and governance. And that we are looking from the start at safe AI and how we as human beings can do this properly and safely and actually for the benefit of a wider humanity rather than just for the purposes of earning money. So there is hope there, but there is a very genuine risk. One of the things that I've shared with Deborah is a link to the video AlphaGo, where an AI managed to defeat the world champion Go player. And I think that is compulsory viewing for anyone who actually wants to see potentially what can happen with AI, not just in the realms of a board game, but actually how it has implications for humanity as a whole. So I would encourage everyone to watch that. It's fascinating. It's edge of the seat stuff, believe me. And yes, look at it, think about it, and act on it.
Yeah, Peter.
Just very, very quickly, one thing we haven't talked about and was so apparent 120 years ago with Standard Oil and things like that and the railways is monopoly. Will we continue abusing those white men who run things like Palantir because they're not broken up, because they get this monopoly position, they gouge it. And I just think there is, you know, opening the marketplace, if you like, fighting them as monopolies who are extracting value from us and also gouging prices is another tool against them.
Yep, definitely. We had a question from the chat about about ways that companies and businesses can give young people the platform to have a voice and make an active contribution to the world. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I can try. I think outreach is really, really important. I think a lot of I'm doing a project at the moment around inclusion and diversity, particularly trying to get young Black, Asian, and minority ethnic talent in children's industry, and that's a microcosm really of a broader problem, and that is that a lot of companies sort of set themselves up in a community and then have very little to do with the community that they're currently set up in. So there's a claim from a lot of companies that they do advertise for BAME talent, but it doesn't come through the door. But then you ask them, have you actually reached out to that community? And the answer is no. Similarly, that goes for any kind of organization, is that if you want to, and it's a point that someone made earlier, if you want to encourage change, you need to start a dialogue with the communities that you currently operate and work inside. I think it was the same conversation we had about building houses and how it's. I think that what social media and digital technology has allowed us to kind of go where it's allowed us to go is to be almost obsessed with the singularity and the self. And actually where we need to go is to actually start to become obsessed with community and one another. And technology actually, when Tim Berners-Lee set up the World Wide Web, that was his entire dream. His entire dream was to create a space, a multi-space where people could get together and talk. And what's happened is that we've had the privatization of essentially a public space, and that's now gone into our lives. And we need to start talking as a community. I'm kind of meandering all over the place here, but my central tenet is that, we need to embrace one another, in a way, and bring each other in to have conversations like that.
Yeah, definitely. Great, so we've got like 5 minutes left. Maybe just time for one more question. Anyone has one? If not, I mean, Neil, I feel like you haven't said anything for a while, so maybe if you have a kind of housing related input, maybe.
Well, I'm listening carefully, and it is hard in the case of technology to say exactly how technology will impact on the nature of housing. because I mean, yes, clearly you can wire your house up and you can have gadgets that control your heating and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, housing hasn't changed in generations. I mean, we've got better at insulating it and maybe better at designing it. But a house today, I mean, lots of people live in Victorian houses or Georgian houses and so forth, and they work perfectly well. I mean, you can see things changing in the real estate world, and I pick up on John's point that sometimes the gigantic nature of some problems just overwhelms people, and they start to think, well, it's just so big, there's nothing I as an individual can do. But just at a tiny level, I mean, we've put LED lighting in all of our buildings. Now, that doesn't make them carbon neutral, but it certainly is saving a lot of energy, and it's stopping a lot of heat being put out into the world. We've insulated lots of our buildings. Again, it hasn't made them carbon neutral, but it is a direction of change. And it is that, you know, can you switch the lights off? It's just, can you do lots and lots of little simple things? That of itself makes you feel better about the problem. It makes you feel it's not overwhelming, that something can be done, and slowly the ship will turn around, and hopefully we'll fix some of the problems that we've made for ourselves.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
agree. Yeah, I mean, as somebody who is neurodivergent, I do have some issues with executive function. So one of the things I find is that I may have a huge list of tasks, but ultimately, if I see that, I'm completely paralyzed. However, if I break that down into the most important ones and create a to-do list of 3 things, I can do that. And that's vitally important. So maybe even that is a starting point. Agreed.
yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things about the climate and stuff. Always any problem is always going to be made up of small pieces, but collectively making this change that needs to happen in the world. Yeah. Okay. So Bridgette left.
Curtis, I have something to add.
Yeah,
I was listening to a panel discussion a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the 15-minute city. And it's something that came up over lockdown in Paris. And this was another kind of little group of people. We were talking about how, you know, the magnitude of change gets too big, but we can work if we work within smaller communities, and the maximum would be 15 minutes. So if you can start to condense your impact, do you think, what can I do within 15 minutes of where I live, where my community is? So we talk of communities, but I don't think we define them in a way that becomes accessible. So for me, it's an opportunity to look back and think, what does community mean as a concept? Where does it fit into our infrastructure? You know, to use a word that Melanie used before. We talk a lot about the high street disappearing, but has it just readjusted? So we don't see a lot of the informal economy that exists behind closed doors. So Neil's challenge is, where do you start to create your stories when you don't know where your community is and how it's structured? So I love this idea about 15 minutes, that we can't go, that as a human beings, it gets too big beyond that. But we can look within 15 minutes of where we live or where we work and start to create impact there. So there's a challenge for Neil, is that where do housing associations come into the discussion about what that community definition is? For me, I think that's a good start point.
Great.
Yep.
I think that might be the end of our time. But yeah, John, if you want to say one last word, and then I'll kind of wrap up.
Yeah, I think that the entire point of the Great Imagining is to put schools actually at the heart of the community. I mean, you know, that is almost like when the internet was invented and we had this distributed network of nodes where information, actually schools are the nodes in all our communities. And actually, if we can start there and distribute and disseminate the information at that level, it spreads out to parents as well. And actually we educate, inspire the next generation. So that would be, you know, that would be my thought.
Yeah,
on it.
I mean, yeah, good place to close. And yeah, thanks everyone for their contributions. I think we've had a lot of really interesting ideas have been thrown around, and I think it's going to be really useful to take that information forward and yeah, hopefully gets through to the Great Imagining and we inspire the whole UK of secondary schools. Yeah, so I think that about wraps up our talk today. And yeah, just would like to thank everyone for being here. And yeah, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will you share? I mean, what's the next step? I'm just curious. We stay? Is there a sort of a way to stay in touch with people we've met today, or is that, do we share our details?
So that'll be great.
Yeah.
I'd definitely like to talk to well, everybody on this panel, but there's a couple of people in particular I'd like to, whose brains I would like to pick.
Yeah, I'm sure my mum is the link to everyone, I think. So yeah, I'm sure it can all be kind of filtered up through there. But yeah, so yeah, I mean this panel is being recorded, and if anyone wanted to view it, it will be later. You can find it through the Harris Fairy Tales of the Great Imagining. Yeah, great. Okay.
Excellent. Really, really nice.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah,
Great conversation.
Thank you.